You're now listening to an archive episode of Or So I Thought, back when the podcast went by a different name. I really hope you enjoy it, and please make sure to listen to our new stuff. So, after you're done here, just scroll up, pick a new episode, and press play.
Mark Twain once said, "I have never let my schooling interfere with my education." This might be more applicable today than ever before. For this episode, I had the honor of interviewing Seth Godin. The man is an icon and an idol for anyone in the fields of marketing, tech, or teaching. He pretty much needs no introduction. But if you need some vital stats...
I define myself as a writer and a blogger and a teacher and an entrepreneur, and a dad and someone who cooks lunch for the people in the office every day. And I work with the Acumen Fund and 20 other things. But mostly I like to share insight with others, and you can find me by typing Seth into Google.
His blog is the most popular single-person blog in the world, and he is the author of 17 books, most of which are bestsellers. What I wanted to learn from him is, if we've gotten all this schooling, why are so many of us still struggling to find our groove in our work? Is our education to blame? What didn't we learn in school? And we end up finding out that the 20th century model of higher education is broken, and we need to take matters into our own hands. Before we dive in, though, let me give you a rundown of how this is going to go. First, we'll hear from Seth about his ideology when it comes to work. We'll define a concept he made famous with one of his books. Then, in the second section, we'll look at why this has caused a disconnect with the traditional education system. And we get a glimpse into what Seth is personally doing to bridge the gap. Then in section 3, we'll look more in depth into how we can take charge of our own growth and learning, no matter how old we are. In 2007, Seth published what is probably my favorite book of his. The book is called The Dip, and it should be required reading for anyone who looks to better themselves.
The thesis of The Dip is that in a Google world, and I wrote it before we lived in a Google world, being number one is worth way more than anyone thinks. Because I can buy from anybody. Why would I buy the third best Bialy? Why would I seek out the seventh best Axe? Why would I hire the fourth best freelancer? In any given moment, the internet lets me find the best. Now, best doesn't mean the most expensive, the most luxurious. It might not even mean the one who would win in a standardized test. It just means the best for me in this moment. If you can't be the best, you're always going to be struggling.
If you can't be the best for your chosen situation, you're always going to be struggling. Let's remember this because it sets up much of what we'll discuss going forward. Back to Seth and the actual definition of the dip.
But to become the best in any subset of what you do, the best version of you, you have to do work that's truly difficult. You have to get through this dip, which is the spot after when the part it's fun and before the part where it's really paying off. In those moments, the dip is when most people quit. So if you go to a gym in January, it's full. Because in January, everyone is fat from the holidays and it's winter and they want to lose some weight. But if you go in March, it's empty. Because before any of those people could actually stick it out long enough to become healthy, they quit. Because that's when it gets hard. It's no longer exciting because it's new. But it's not yet amazing because it's working. It's that in-between moment, and that's when people quit. My argument is that's a dumb time to quit. You'd be better off quitting in January before you start if you realize you're going to quit in March because you wouldn't waste all that time. All of which goes to this hard part, which is how do you tell the difference between something that's never going to get better, a relationship that's never going to get better, smoking cigarettes, which is just going to keep getting you sicker and sicker, something you do that is a dead end versus something that's merely a dip. Well, my best answer is, has anyone else ever got through this dip before you? So organic chemistry is a dip. Organic chemistry is horrible. It's hard to understand. It's an enormous amount of work, but you got to do it before you can become a doctor. Has anyone ever gotten through organic chemistry before? Yes. Does getting through organic chemistry make it then likely you will become a doctor? Well, sure, in certain settings. So if you want to be a doctor, you should be glad that organic chemistry exists because it's a dip and it makes being a doctor more valuable. On the other hand, if you are seeking to win 7 Academy Awards and do $200 million at the box office with a movie you're going to make by yourself with a camcorder, I would strongly suggest that you don't try that. Because that's not a dip, that's a dead end. It's never even come close to being done before. Does that mean some people are going to be dissuaded from doing something amazing? Possibly, and I accept that responsibility. But if you go into it knowing what you can get out of it, you won't end up hiding, you'll end up actually doing the hard work. If you say to yourself, well, I'm not going to win any Academy Award, and I'm not going to sell any tickets, but yes, it is possible to put an enormous amount of effort into a home movie and end up having it seen 10 million times on YouTube. And if I get through that dip, then the phone's going to ring and someone's going to offer me access to tools that can get me through the next dip. And so I'm on a journey.
This journey to being the best version of ourselves isn't just for artists or entrepreneurs or creators. It applies to all.
From people who aren't independent. If you look at how did you become the CEO of Ford Motor Company, or how did you become, the Speaker of the House, whatever it is, these are people whose life has been a series of projects and a series of dips. They didn't say 20 years from now, that's what I'm going to get, so I'm just going to slog for 19 and a half years with no positive feedback. Our life, our career is a series of projects, whether they're connected or disconnected.
And now we start to see the chasm between what learning should be and what it looks like today. Learning should mirror the dip. It should be a series of projects, whether connected or disconnected, that take us on a quest consistently closer to our best self. But I argue that the traditional options for young adults generally put us on a hamster wheel to a carrot that lies 20 years in the future. It's not a series of projects. It's become one long slog. No wonder we stopped running a few years into it.
What I chose to do was to build a lifetime of projects. So I've posted about this, but I've done hundreds of projects, most of which failed. But any given one of them, even though it's not a home run, has a shot at getting me on base. And if I can keep playing the game and playing the game and playing the game, sooner or later, it looks from the outside like I'm an overnight success. And I like just playing the game. My goal wasn't the end. My goal was the journey.
And Seth seemed to have understood this even at an early age. I found very interesting this anecdote of his that points out his affinity for taking on projects and for shaking up the status quo in his own education.
When I was in high school, they had just started this idea of weighted class rank, which was that they would give you a higher class rank if you took AP courses and difficult courses. Well, my school didn't have it because they said they didn't know how to do it. And at the time, I was a better than average student, but I wasn't first in my class. And I had taken every hard course I could find. So selfishly, I said, well, it would be really good for me if there was weighted class rank here because my class rank will go up and I'll get into college. So I went to the principal and I said, well, if I could write a program that would do that, would you use it? He said, sure, because he knew I wouldn't do it. So I went to the local university, University of Buffalo, and I got an account. And this is when they used punch cards and IBM 360s. And amazingly, I didn't know that you could look up how to do a bubble sort or how to make databases work. I didn't know that that would have been written down. I thought you had to figure it out for yourself. So I independently invented the bubble sort and figured out how to do weighted class rank for my entire school. It took like 400 punch cards in this big stack. And what I learned from that wasn't that I should be a computer science major, though I was. I was terrible at computer science. What I learned from that was there was a side road if you wanted to take it, and that there were many, many times where if you just gave yourself permission to go learn something and do something, you might be amazed that it could happen.
Giving ourselves permission is a major key in our personal growth and career. In the next section, we'll hear examples of others who have taken responsibility for their own development, and how Seth is helping with this. He's created an interesting avenue for getting through our own lifetime of projects. Then we round out the episode looking at ideas to get us started with this upgraded approach to self-development. To make sure I knew Seth's own stance on higher education, I asked him for his view on the pros and cons of the big college system of today.
The biggest merit is the connection you get with other human beings that you're on the journey with. The biggest myth is that the sticker on the back of your parents' car is worth anything. That college is expensive, not because you learn something there. Every MIT course is free online. So there's no longer a wall between you and the course. The wall is between you and the accreditation, you and the degree, you and the piece of paper. And what we're seeing happening super fast is the piece of paper is going down in value. That means that someone who's thinking hard about a super expensive 4-year, $250,000 in debt education needs to think really hard about what the alternatives to that might be.
As a personal side note, I like that Seth isn't just throwing his belief out there without taking action. He's had this stance on education for a while, but he recently took steps to help find solutions by starting a program called the Alt MBA.
The Alt MBA is an intensive workshop that we run. It's virtual. It takes place all over the world in 19 different time zones. But it's unlike every other online course on purpose. It's the opposite. Instead of a lot of people, we just have 100 or so. Instead of it being take it when you want it, it's all in sync with everybody else. There are live coaches, one coach for every 10 people. It's all project-based. There's no secret video, no secret lessons. I don't think it's easy to say to the world, here, this is digital, but only some people can see it. So most of my digital stuff is everywhere. This is the opposite of that. This is project-based, cohort-based, and it works. We have a 99% graduation rate, and we transform people. That's our goal. As for what it's for, which is one of the things we teach at the Alt MBA, what is it for? We're not trying to teach people the stuff that you learn in a typical MBA program about balance sheets and just-in-time manufacturing. Instead, we try to teach people to see the world as it is. We try to teach them to understand ideas and how to make decisions. And mostly, we try to teach them how to make the change they seek in the world. That making change happen is actually the opportunity that most of us have, some of us for the very first time. That we're not going to be able to make a living following the instructions of someone else because that person will find someone cheaper than us to do it. We're going to make a living by making change happen, by leading, by connecting. And the Alt MBA goes straight to the heart of that.
Seth himself has stated that the Alt MBA isn't for everyone. There is an application process, and it carries a premium price tag for a 1-month workshop. What he has said is that it's one attractive alternative for the right individual looking to build a lifetime of projects. Out of curiosity, I sought out some graduates of the Alt MBA.
I am currently a web designer and product owner for WholeFoodsMarket.com. I sort of am the person who decides what we work on and then do design to help support that.
That's Casey Lamb. She took the Alt MBA program. I asked her about her experience and how it changed her.
I would say within the first week, within the first few days, light bulbs just started going off left and right. I could see that I was surrounded by a group of extremely intelligent, very generous people who have the ability to give me constructive feedback about my ideas and were able to push me and help me see things in a totally different way. So that's one of the things about the program that is difficult sometimes to communicate is that we read a lot of really great material in Alt MBA, but the thing that makes it special is that because there's a selection process, not everybody gets into the program, that they choose the people who it makes sense as a community to bring into the fold. So it's all people who are just really smart, really just wonderful people who want to make a difference in the world. And there's something about that energy that just, I just fed right off of it. So even though I was exhausted, by week 3, I was still just chewing on all of this great material and talking to all of these great people, and it just like put a fire in my belly.
So for Casey, it was about the connection with others on the same journey.
And I'm a photographer and creative producer. My background's in marketing and in the nonprofit world.
That's Bradley Spitzer. He was part of the 3rd graduating class of Alt MBA.
The questions I learned through the Alt MBA process have really helped me clarify what success looks like, what's important, who is it for, what change, and another one is what change are you trying to make? Everything that we do, everything that we market, we want someone to change. We want someone to start doing this or stop doing this. We want them, instead of buying from this company, we want them to buy from this company. Instead of overeating or eating unhealthily, we want them to change. When you can get really specific with that change that you want out of your audience, that can really help clarify a team, how they approach that challenge and that problem.
My partner and I own a personal training studio that's almost 16 years old, so I've been around since 2000, so here in Vancouver.
Nikki Layton was the last person I spoke to regarding their Alt MBA experience. And her favorite lesson really left an impression on me.
Some of the ones that resonated most significantly with me were the thoughts around A Beautiful Constraint, which is one of the books we had to read, and then we had to do some work in the course around it. But it was like this concept that, when you have constraints in your life, in your business, there's a situation that isn't perfect. So pretty much any day in everybody's life, right? And how we choose to look at that constraint, can have a dramatic impact on the outcome. And so the book, A Beautiful Constraint, is all about how do you take a constraint and look at it as something that's beautiful and something that helps you to basically flip that challenge on its head and, do something different than you ever thought. And it's not like, I don't have enough resources or I don't have enough time. It's like, okay, these are my resources. What can I do with that?
So I feel that the common thread here is of 3 professionals in different fields who also a need to keep growing and learning. And instead of following traditional avenues like getting their JD or their MBA, they realized that they needed a more tailored approach, one that fits with their career arc. They found this through an intense online workshop, but many people also find it through apprenticeships, a forgotten framework that needs to make a comeback. And others yet find that they learn best from taking on community projects for the sake of learning. Up next, Seth helps us uncover the skills that hold the most value in today's world, and how that helps us take inventory once we're ready to design a tailored personal development plan. So you're now convinced of the benefits of creating your own form of higher learning. You're with us, and you're aware that the avenues to get there are plenty. There are online courses, there are in-person workshops, there are apprenticeships, there are books, and there are hands-on learning opportunities. But what are the skills that hold the most value in today's world? Enter Seth again.
Most of the people who came before you had to know stuff because it was really hard to look things up. And most of the people who came before you, if you're 25, had to be inside the factory because it was inside the factory where all the good jobs were. That the gatekeeper decided who got in. And if you got in, you were secure and you were a cog in a machine that paid you well and gave you leverage. But today we live in a world where if it's worth memorizing, it's worth looking up. And we live in a world where outside the factory, you have way more leeway and leverage than you might have inside the factory. So what we need is someone who's curious, who has emotional intelligence, who can bring enthusiasm and good humor to the work they do, who is dependable and eager and connected and sympathetic and empathetic and trustable and trusting. These are all basic fundamental elements of humanity that have been pushed aside by what were your SAT scores and stupid stuff like that.
So we have here a list of skills to prioritize: curiosity, emotional intelligence, enthusiasm, connectedness, trust. What are you doing to get better at these, to build these so that they shine through in your work? A regular dose isn't enough. To get leverage, we need to be proactive about growing these to remarkable levels. Seth then shared a story about his own personal development journey. It centers around the famous Zig Ziglar tapes.
What Zig did for me is, in all those years that I was working through one dip or another, he, in his own words, filled the mental bank account with positive information that overcomes all those withdrawals you're making when you're getting rejected. That if you're constantly feeding your head with no, not for now, didn't work, you're a failure, you're in the dip, sooner or later you're going to believe all that. And the idea that you could sit in your car and listen for hours and hours on end to somebody who would put a different kind of voice in your head, that countered it. And that made it easier for me to maintain a level head as I was pushing projects forward that other people necessarily weren't applauding.
This concept of controlling the inner story, the dialogue in your head, this is another crucial capability to master. My belief is that any form of education we take on should include it. One of the main myths about today's educational system, and the driving force behind this entire podcast series, is that we have been raised to believe that traditional education is a silver bullet, a fail-safe solution to earning a living. That's not true anymore. The same applies to many other opportunities in our career journey.
Most doors aren't going to open. And so I would say the first thing you need to do is acknowledge that most doors aren't going to open. I've never been on Oprah. I tried for a little while, but it became clear to me that the amount of effort I would have to go through to get on Oprah was going to distract me from being able to teach and work with all sorts of people who were eager to hear from me. That doesn't mean I gave up. It doesn't mean I compromised. It just means I realized there's a difference between doors that are going to open and doors that aren't. And if you're spending a lot of time banging against a door that has no history of opening, you're hiding. And instead, it makes way more sense to engage with people who want to hear from you than it does to yell at people who are trying to ignore you.
Yelling accomplishes very little because it shows a disconnect with reality. If you ask me, educating yourself and preparing yourself to become the best at what you do is the only way to gain traction with your work. Seth has a few closing comments on this.
Well, one of the best lines from The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy is, always bring a towel. And the reason you should always bring a towel, he says, is because you could show up at someone's house with almost nothing else. But if you brought your own towel, they're like, wow, he's pretty prepared. And they'll even loan you a toothbrush because you could have forgotten it. But if you have your own towel, wow, that guy really showed up. So that's slightly tongue-in-cheek. But showing up with your own towel is a really good way to land with your feet on the ground.
Wits About You is supported by FreshBooks. Here's the thing. I can spend hours and hours producing podcasts, but when it comes to invoicing, I can't bear to do it for more than a minute. With FreshBooks, it only takes me 30 seconds to create a professional-looking invoice, so I can get back to doing what I love to do, podcasting. FreshBooks even gives your clients tons of ways to pay online by card, so no waiting for the proverbial check in the mail. Go to freshbooks.com/wits to get a free 30-day trial. That's freshbooks.com/WITS. And write Wits About You in the How Did You Hear About Us section. Seth Godin is a very generous man. He was generous enough to sit down and answer our questions. But more importantly, he fundraises for many great causes. The main one is Acumen Fund, which supports initiatives to eliminate poverty around the world. If you'd like to donate, like I have, You can do that at acumen.org, or just find the link in the show notes. You've been listening to Wits About You. You can find out more about us at witsaboutyou.com. Right on the page there, you'll also find a sign-up form for our email newsletter. You'll be glad you did. I'm Alex Cespedes. Thanks for listening.